When I first started researching rabbits, going to Hoppy hours was one of the things that excited me most. Being surrounded by a bunch of rabbits and fellow bunny lovers sounded like the ideal dream. When I did finally get my rabbit, I always planned to take him to a Hoppy hour, but never got around to it, and now I'm glad I didn't. When I was researching, I couldn't find any videos that consolidated everything, including all the information about Hoppy hours, how to attend one, and whether or not they were safe. So I'm going to try and do that today. I'm going to give my own perspective, but I'm also going to try to be objective and tell you whether or not it's something you should do for your own rabbits. Literally happens every single day where Sachin just wants to be groomed, but Bachin doesn't always want to groom him, so he usually just grooms himself, and I think Sachin just pretends that he's being groomed, and usually when Bachin stops, Sachin gets pissed off and then nips him. Also, I get a lot of comments about Sachin's eyes being red. They're lilac, guys. They're like purple, but they do have kind of a red pupil. I also do want to add a disclaimer that everything in this video is my own opinions. I personally have never and will never take my rabbits to a Hoppy hour, so take that for what you will. The first thing we should do is actually define what a Hoppy hour is, and this isn't really that easy because every place seems to have their own rules and their own ways of doing it. In short, Hoppy hours are a rabbit socializing event, and they can vary a lot. Some Hoppy hours are headed by rescues in an attempt to get their rabbits adopted, so you usually don't bring your own rabbits to it, and you're just allowed to sit and interact with the different rabbits they have for adoption just to see if there's any that are a good fit for you. Another version of this is where you get to see all the rescue rabbits, but then you're also allowed to bring your own rabbits just to see if your rabbits form a really easy bond with other rabbits. This is kind of like a very intense version of bunny dating, where you just have your rabbit run around with a lot of different rescue rabbits and just see how they get along. I've seen versions of this where multiple people bring their rabbits in at once, and I've also seen rescues do this privately if you want to consider a mate for your rabbit, and they just let your rabbit with all the other rabbits to see who they naturally gravitate towards. There's also more private Hoppy hours, I guess. Sometimes there's just independent people in an area who organize to have a lot of rabbits come together. These are usually just rabbit enthusiasts who might have a rabbit or two of their own. I've also seen different Hoppy hours at different festivals and different pet conventions. The majority of Hoppy hours do require that your rabbits are fixed, so that means the males are neutered and the females are spayed. How they verify this can vary. Some Hoppy hours actually require that you provide a neuter or spay certificate, while others kind of just trust the people. I've seen some Hoppy hours make an exception, especially for younger rabbits or senior rabbits, and I've seen others who are very strict and don't tolerate any exceptions because it'd be very dangerous if you had an unneutered male and an unfixed female. Not only would they be very territorial and hormonal, but you could also end up with a litter of babies, which kind of defeats the points of rescues doing Hoppy hours to get their current ones adopted. Now, if this is your first time hearing of this, you're probably a little freaked out. For those of you that don't know, rabbit bonding process is pretty intensive, so putting a bunch of unbonded rabbits together seems like a disaster waiting to happen. The idea is that you introduce all these rabbits in a neutral territory so that there isn't any reason for any of them to be hormonal, and a lot of the times you have different moderators or the people who run the rescue who are also watching out for different territorial behaviors. Some Hoppy hours have multiple pens where if your rabbit starts to get very territorial or hormonal, they might move them to a new pen, which usually stops the territorialness, or they just might request the owner to leave with their rabbit or just hold the rabbit so it can't attack anyone. I've also seen them potentially remove any toys if there's a lot of fighting over them, or they'll introduce new toys if the rabbits are getting bored and a little bit antsy. There's also usually multiple litter boxes, and they're all open, so there's no room for rabbits to get territorial around that. And again, all the rabbits being fixed really helps. A lot of it is also left to kind of viewer or rabbit discretion, where people who do have very territorial or antisocial rabbits are usually advised not to bring their rabbits to Hoppy hours, or if they do, to supervise them very closely. The big question about this is it actually safe and does it actually work? Now, this is really hard to answer on a general basis because, like I said, every Hoppy hour is run so differently, and whether or not it's safe really varies on who the moderators are and what type of rabbits you have, and how this so-called neutral territory has been set up. In the best case scenario, Hoppy hours are completely safe and there isn't any issues, but sadly, the best case scenario isn't the average case scenario, and as pet owners, we always have to prepare for the worst case scenario. This kind of sounds like one of my computer science courses. So, as I was saying, the safety of a hoppy hour really depends on your individual one. And maybe in your area, there's a little bit more resources to know which hoppy hours tend to be safe. But because this answer can be so variable, I personally would never risk it with my own rabbits. If you do have a rabbit there, even if it's not your own, and that rabbit is very territorial, your rabbit is put into a level of danger. This level of danger can significantly increase if you have poor moderators. A lot of the times the moderators are just the rabbit owners, and from what I've seen, most owners are really aware of their own rabbits and are really good on keeping an eye. But sometimes you're actually not allowed into the hoppy hour pen, especially in these larger conventions. And in a case like that, you're really relying usually on volunteers to make sure that your rabbit stays safe. Rabbits have huge personalities, and the dynamics of even a bonded pair can change drastically. My boys have been bonded for a year, and they still have spits and spats and fights. Some days they're completely inseparable and are grooming each other nonstop, and other days they're at the other end of the cage annoyed with each other and nipping each other. Rabbit body language is also really hard to read. To the untrained eye, a super scared rabbit can look very similar to a very contented rabbit, and an extremely territorial rabbit can just look like a very sociable, playful rabbit. All these factors can make hoppy hours extremely dangerous, but just because something is dangerous doesn't mean that it necessarily should be avoided at all costs. I always think that if the pros outweigh the cons, it's definitely something you should consider. For example, I let my rabbits outside, which does have some level of risk. There's always a risk for predators, there's always a risk for different bacteria, and there's always a risk for them getting spooked or scared to death. This isn't a decision that someone else can make for you, and you really have to weigh the individual dangers against the benefits. In my case, the dangers are quite low because of my area, and I think the benefit and reward is really high because my rabbits love being outside, especially when the temperature is a lot milder like today, and they have appropriate covering. And just an FYI, because I've had a lot of people asking, since I filmed a lot of videos outdoors recently, my rabbits are not outdoor rabbits. They're full-time indoor rabbits, which is why this enclosure would be completely unsuitable for them to be outdoors 24/7. I do have a pet room tour and a cage tour if you guys are interested, but they just have supervised play outside. So starting back, do the pros outweigh the cons for hoppy hour? Well, the danger is really relative to your own area and your own specific hoppy hour. If you do want to take your rabbit to one, I'd highly suggest reaching out to the rabbit people in your area and asking which ones they'd recommend, because I'm sure, like all things, some hoppy hours are way better managed than others. I think if you're really careful, you can get the danger to be relatively low. However, I don't think the benefit is all that high. Rabbits really don't need socialization from a bunch of other rabbits. That's not normal or natural. In the wild, rabbits are highly social and they form a long-term social bond. Most rabbits stay with their herd for their entire lifetime. Especially the males do tend to leave their herd when they reach maturity and to find a new one, but many females actually stay in their herds their entire lives. In the wild, when two rabbits come across each other, they're not going to see each other as friends. Instead, they're going to see each other as competitors because in the wild, all rabbits are competing for a limited food source and limited territory. So when two rabbits come across each other in the wild and they're not from the same herd, they're probably going to fight, and oftentimes till the death or until one is very badly injured. Of course, our domesticated rabbits are very different than the wild European rabbit, but I think a lot of their natural and instinctual things still stay. I personally don't see any point in having your rabbit interact with tens and potentially even hundreds of other rabbits only to tear them away a few minutes later. Whether or not it's inherently bad is really only your choice to make, but I can say that I personally would never do it. Again, I don't think it's natural, I don't think it's safe, and I think it's almost a little bit cruel. I feel a lot of people use hoppy hours and different rabbit socialization options instead of buying their rabbit a bonded companion. Even if you do choose to do hoppy hours and you go about it safely, having your rabbit interact with hundreds of other rabbits for even a couple hours is not the same as them having a full-time bonded companion. If you do have a bonded pair of rabbits, I don't think there's any need to socialize your rabbit with other rabbits, so going to events like different hoppy hours really isn't required or even that enriching for the rabbits. If you have a single rabbit, I think hoppy hours can be a good option, just as a way to socialize your rabbit. I try to discuss this a lot, but humans are not substitutes for rabbits. We can't groom them, we can't flop with them, and we can't communicate with them. So it is a lot more natural for rabbits to be with other species of their same kind. So I think a hoppy hour event can provide that, granted that you make sure that it's completely safe. Even though I do think a single rabbit will get more enjoyment than a bonded pair would from going to hoppy hours, I still don't think that it's required by any means, and there are plenty of single rabbits who live their entire lives as single rabbits and are very content. If you do have a single rabbit and you're looking for ways to socialize, what are your options? Like I've kind of made clear in the video, I personally wouldn't recommend hoppy hours, but if you do find one that's local to your area and that is pretty cautious about how they treat their rabbits, I think it can be a good option. I think a better alternative would actually be to have playdates with another rabbit. I think playdates are a lot better than something like hoppy hour because your rabbit actually has time to build and strengthen a bond over time. I see a lot of people in different Facebook groups where their rabbits are bonded to other rabbits even though they don't permanently live together, like mother and daughter pairs where the daughter takes her rabbit and the mother keeps one, but they still meet up often and the rabbits seem to have a bond. If you do decide to do your own playdate with a fellow rabbit friend, make sure that you're being very safe about it, make sure that both the rabbits are fixed, and make sure they're meeting in a truly neutral territory. If you're doing it in someone's home, that may or may not be that neutral, especially if one of the rabbits has already had access. So just be careful, and please don't use any of the toys that you have from their cages. Try to use everything that's completely new or disinfected. And after your rabbits get along and have time to build a bond, then you can be a little bit more carefree about your playdates. But in the initial stages, please be very careful because whenever you're introducing rabbits, there's always a risk. If you don't have a friend with a rabbit, or you really do want to attend a hoppy hour and you think would be really fun for you and your rabbit, here's some things you can do to make it as safe as possible. I think the first thing you could do is find one that's a little bit smaller and locally run. There's a lot of these different hoppy hours that happen at huge pet festivals and different rabbit conventions, and a lot of the times it's just very chaotic and a lot of people actually leave their rabbits there with the volunteers. So you have people that aren't supervising their own rabbits and volunteers that are often overrun with hundreds of rabbits. Also, another thing that can make it a little bit safer is if you're actually allowed to sit inside the pen or the room with the rabbits. I think their owners are really the best people at understanding our own rabbits' body language and our own rabbits' behaviors. So as long as you can monitor your rabbit and keep them safe, I think this drastically improves the safety of it. Another thing you can do is actually reach out and what they mean by neutral territory. Obviously, we have our own definitions, but the specifics of it really does vary shelter to shelter or organization to organization. So just ask how they disinfect after a hoppy hour and what things they do to make sure all their rabbits stay safe, and then you can decide whether you want to bring your rabbits or not. I also personally think that the ones indoors are a little bit better because you have a lot less variables. Sometimes rabbits can be getting along great and then something really spooks them and then they can cause them to have a fight. That's also what I would do in regards to having hoppy hours that are open to the public. There are a lot where actually anyone can come in and watch, and I think those can get a little bit hectic. So if you can, I would find one that only admits people based on their rabbits. And again, I can't emphasize this enough because hoppy hours really do tend to vary organization and area to area. So please reach out to bunny owners in your own areas and find out which hoppy hours are safer there or whether which ones to avoid. And even talking to owners in your area and finding out which ones are the best and which ones to avoid. You can also go to supervise it just once. Just because you bring your rabbit there doesn't mean you necessarily have to let them out and interact. It's completely fine if you just want to keep your rabbit in a carrier for a little bit and watch the dynamics of the group before letting your rabbit out, or if you just want to go once without your rabbit just to observe what it's like. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something new. Hoppy hour is a term that I just saw constantly being thrown around the community, but I didn't see anyone really discussing in depth what it was. So this is all the information that I could find based on my own research. If you guys have any more experiences, please do share, and I'd love to know your thoughts on whether you'd actually take your rabbit to a hoppy hour or whether you've even been to one. Also, I know I've made a few videos critiquing Lennon the Bunny's care in the past, but she does have a couple videos on hoppy hours she's attended, and she's actually thrown Lennon a birthday party, which is kind of like a giant Hoppy hour, and all these things seem to have gone really successful for her, so be sure to watch her videos if you're curious to learn more. She also does have a video about how Lennon was attacked in one of these Hoppy hours, which I don't think you should use to completely deter you away. Just be educated, and if you guys want a better perspective on what her experience was like, be sure to watch that video. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Be sure to comment below. I love interacting with you guys, and if you want to talk privately, you can always message me on Instagram. Bye.